"Don't go, they're waiting outside," Olivia Carter whispered, her voice barely rising above the clatter of glasses and the soft hum of the restaurant. Her dark eyes flicked toward the doorway, catching shadows that didn't belong to the usual staff. The chandeliers overhead reflected a golden light onto polished oak tables, but the warmth did nothing to ease the tension coiling in her chest. She gripped the tray tighter, feeling the weight of the fine crystal in her hands, her knuckles turning white beneath the black gloves she always wore for work. Every step she took felt measured, careful, as if one misstep would ripple across the entire room, drawing unwanted attention. The restaurant was quiet now, a deceptive calm, the kind that made a person forget the storm waiting just beyond the heavy front doors. Dante Romano sat at the center table, the afternoon sun catching the sharp lines of his face, his dark suit tailored to perfection, shoulders broad and still, radiating the kind of silent authority that made people freeze mid-breath. Olivia's heart pounded in response, a steady drumbeat of both fear and urgency. She had seen him from a distance before, commanding rooms with the ease of a man who expected obedience without question, but up close, the intensity was palpable, the kind of presence that made the air thick and hard to breathe. She could see the subtle details now, the faint crease in his brow, the restless tap of a cuff against the polished table, the careful, deliberate calm that masked the storm underneath. Her mind raced as she leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough so only he could hear, "I know it's sudden, but trust me, there's someone outside." The words felt heavy, burdened with the responsibility of being the only one who noticed. Every customer in the room, every waiter and busboy moving silently between tables, remained oblivious to the invisible thread of tension Olivia now carried, a thread that tied her fate to the safety of the man before her. Her breathing hitched slightly as she caught a flicker of movement from the doorway, a shadow passing where none should have been, and her pulse quickened. She had to stay calm, had to maintain the composed posture she had perfected over months of working in fine dining establishments, the small gestures honed to blend in, to vanish into the background until needed. But now invisibility felt like a luxury she could not afford. She leaned in just a little more, careful not to touch, careful not to alarm, but desperate for him to understand. The subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the faint aroma of roasted meat and polished wood, grounding her for a moment, reminding her that despite the danger, she needed to be precise. Her fingers clenched the tray as she measured each word, each pause, letting the gravity of her whisper sink into the space between them. Dante's eyes flicked up, sharp and calculating, dark orbs that seemed to pierce right through the crowded room, catching her for a heartbeat too long, the tiniest rise of his eyebrow betraying both surprise and recognition. The silence stretched, the hum of diners and the soft scrape of chairs fading into the background as the full weight of the warning hung between them. Olivia felt a shiver travel down her spine, the fine hairs on her arms standing on end, but she didn't step back. She couldn't. There was no turning away, not now. The moment demanded courage, demanded presence. Her mind raced with all the lessons she had learned, the timing of her steps, the angle of her voice, the need to remain composed under scrutiny. She had seen situations like this before in quiet corners of the city, the unspoken dangers that lurked behind perfectly polished doors, and now she was living one in real time. And Dante, still seated, still observing, leaned slightly forward, his attention now fully captured by the subtle shift in the room, by the tension that only she seemed to perceive, and in that suspended breath between them, the first hint of understanding passed silently from her to him, a wordless acknowledgement that something critical was unfolding, and that only together, in that fleeting fraction of awareness, could the unseen threat be met with the precision and vigilance required. Olivia Carter moved through the softly lit restaurant with the practiced grace of someone who had spent months mastering invisibility, her footsteps silent against the polished hardwood floor. The aroma of roasted chicken and fresh herbs filled the air, mingling with the subtle scent of polished oak and crisp linen, creating a warm, almost serene atmosphere that belied the tension coiling in her chest. She carried the tray steadily, her dark eyes scanning the room for any sign of irregularity, noting the faint rustle of napkins, the glint of silverware, and the careful movements of the other staff who remained oblivious to the approaching danger. Her mind drifted briefly to her life outside the restaurant, to the cramped apartment she shared with her younger brother, the bills that never seemed to end, the nights she spent worrying about whether there would be enough money for rent, enough money to cover a doctor visit if he fell ill. That thought sharpened her focus rather than distracted it, reminding her of the stakes and the need for calm precision. Dante Romano remained seated at the center table, the afternoon sunlight casting sharp angles across his face, illuminating the fine lines that hinted at both experience and authority. His posture was impeccable, back straight, shoulders squared, yet there was a subtle tension in the way he held the stem of his glass, a barely perceptible shift that suggested his instincts were already alert to the changes in the room. Olivia approached carefully, taking one deliberate step at a time, her senses heightened by the faintest shift in the shadows near the doorway. She could feel the subtle vibration of the restaurant around her, the hum of conversation dimming in the background as if the building itself sensed the imminence of a critical moment. Her thoughts returned to her training, the countless hours spent observing the patterns of human behavior, learning to read the smallest cues, the tilt of a head, the narrowing of eyes, the way someone held their breath before taking an action. All of that knowledge crystallized in this moment as she positioned herself at the edge of Dante Romano's awareness, close enough for him to notice the slight stiffness in her posture, the tautness in her expression, yet careful not to draw the attention of those around them. The room felt simultaneously vast and confining, the polished tables and crystal glasses creating reflections and distortions that she navigated instinctively, her body moving with a rhythm born of necessity and experience. She steadied her breathing, felt the cool air brushing her face, and concentrated on the subtle cues Dante gave as his dark eyes followed her movements, assessing, calculating, measuring the intent behind every step. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the tray, the fine porcelain balanced with a delicate precision that mirrored the mental acuity she relied upon in moments like these. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, the sounds of the kitchen fading into a muted hum, leaving only the quiet tension between her and Dante, a space charged with anticipation and unspoken understanding. In that space, she became acutely aware of every detail, the flicker of sunlight across his cufflinks, the faint scent of his cologne mingling with the aroma of the food, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, the subtle shift in his gaze. Each element coalesced into a singular awareness, a readiness that filled the briefest of moments with the weight of consequence. She drew a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the muscles in her back and arms poised for action should the need arise, yet maintaining the appearance of casual composure, the practiced mask of a professional who knew how to blend into the surroundings while holding the center of the moment in her hands. The ambient sounds of the restaurant became a backdrop to the silent conversation passing between them, a language of posture, gaze, and timing that required no words. Olivia held her position, waiting for Dante's acknowledgement, every fiber of her being attuned to the subtle shift in energy, the unspoken dialogue that had passed from instinct to instinct, preparing both of them for the events that were only moments away from unfolding. The soft hum of conversation and clinking silverware seemed to fade into the background as Olivia Carter paused, her eyes locking onto the subtle shift in the shadows near the entrance. The dimmed lighting of the restaurant cast long, warm reflections across the polished oak floors, glinting off wine glasses and cutlery, each surface capturing fragments of the tension that had begun to coil in the air. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing against her shoulders, the steady pulse of her heart syncing with the rhythm of the quiet, almost imperceptible stirrings in the room. The patrons, oblivious to the silent drama unfolding, continued their hushed conversations, their laughter faint and distant, a backdrop to the unspoken alarm that Olivia sensed from a mere glance at the doorway. Dante Romano remained seated, his dark eyes scanning the room with an intensity that seemed to strip away the layers of distraction, focusing on the subtlest changes, the tiniest gestures that could betray movement outside the protected space of the restaurant. Olivia adjusted her stance slightly, her hands lightly resting on the edge of the tray, the porcelain balanced with meticulous precision, and she felt the subtle friction of the polished gloves against the smooth surface. Each breath she took was measured, deliberate, allowing her to maintain the appearance of composure while internally the tension coiled tighter with every passing second. Memories flickered in her mind, the cramped apartment where she had spent countless nights counting bills under the dim glow of a single lamp, the hurried breakfasts and hurried evenings spent ensuring her younger brother was safe and cared for, the relentless pressure of survival that had sharpened her awareness to every nuance in her environment. She shifted slightly closer, careful to remain within Dante's line of sight without alarming the other diners, and she noticed the smallest reactions in him, the faint crease between his brows, the barely perceptible tilt of his head, the way his eyes tracked the movement of a server, registering even the most subtle anomalies in behavior. The quiet intensity of the moment made her acutely aware of the texture of the surroundings, the smooth varnish of the tables, the soft glow of the chandelier crystals, the gentle reflection of sunlight fading through the tall windows. She sensed the unspoken communication passing silently between her and Dante, a language of glances, posture, and micro-expressions that conveyed the urgency without a single audible word. The warmth of the restaurant, the comfort of familiar aromas and the gentle murmur of background activity, contrasted sharply with the awareness of potential disruption, heightening her sensitivity to every detail. Olivia's mind mapped the possibilities, the sequence of events that could unfold if Dante did not recognize the subtle cues she had prepared him to notice. Each movement of her hand, each controlled shift of her weight, was an extension of her understanding, a calculated measure to guide attention without drawing unnecessary focus. She felt the low vibration of energy through the floorboards as diners shifted in their seats, the faintest whispers of air conditioning brushing against her skin, a constant reminder of how connected and observant she needed to remain. The atmosphere held a taut, suspended quality, every reflection on the polished surfaces amplifying the awareness of the delicate balance she maintained, the careful timing and precision required to navigate the space successfully. Dante's gaze remained fixed on her, dark and unreadable, yet the subtle changes betrayed a growing recognition, a hint that the silent warning was not lost on him. Olivia inhaled deeply, steadying herself, aware that every second counted, that the alignment of attention and awareness between them could make the difference in what was to come, each heartbeat echoing with purpose, each controlled movement a testament to her readiness, her resolve, and the unspoken bond forming in the quiet intensity of the moment. Olivia felt a subtle shift in the air as Dante Romano finally straightened in his chair, the faint crease between his brows softening just enough to reveal a flicker of consideration. The polished surfaces of the restaurant reflected the golden afternoon light, casting elongated shadows that danced along the edges of the tables, highlighting the meticulous arrangement of cutlery and the delicate sparkle of crystal glasses. Each patron remained engrossed in their conversations, unaware of the silent tension rippling through the space as Olivia positioned herself a few steps closer, her posture composed yet alert, hands resting lightly on the edge of her tray. The warm scent of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread mingled with the faint, sharp note of citrus from the table centerpieces, grounding her senses even as her mind raced to anticipate every possible reaction from the people around them. Dante's dark eyes followed her movements, their intensity unbroken, capturing the subtle interplay between the flicker of motion near the doorway and the deliberate, measured step she took to close the distance. Olivia's heartbeat accelerated, a steady rhythm underscoring the gravity of the moment as she observed the minute details of his expression, the tilt of his chin, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way his fingers rested against the polished surface of the table. She could feel the quiet energy of the room pressing against her, each soft murmur and faint scrape of a chair amplifying her awareness of the delicate balance between visibility and discretion. Her mind traced the familiar contours of her own training, recalling every careful movement practiced in the kitchens and dining halls she had worked in, the countless hours spent learning to anticipate reactions, to blend seamlessly into the background while remaining prepared to act when necessary. The subtle scent of his cologne reached her again, a faintly woody aroma mixed with hints of citrus, reinforcing the tangible presence of the man she now guarded in more than the customary professional capacity. Olivia adjusted her stance imperceptibly, ensuring that the tray she carried remained steady while her body communicated readiness, alertness, and the careful control she had honed over months of practice. The shadows near the entrance shifted again, the movements drawing a micro-reaction from Dante as he recognized a subtle irregularity in the patterns he had memorized from the surrounding activity. Her gaze met his briefly, a silent exchange that conveyed both warning and reassurance, bridging the unspoken understanding between the observer and the one being observed. The faint creak of the floorboards as a server moved behind her, the low hum of conversation, and the distant clatter of glassware became the orchestrated backdrop to the heightened attention that filled the space, each sound amplifying the tension yet highlighting her poise. Olivia's chest rose and fell in a controlled rhythm, her mind calculating, observing, and predicting, her body attuned to every shift of movement in the room, ready to respond with measured precision should the situation demand it. Dante's hand shifted slightly on the table, a minuscule gesture that Olivia recognized as acknowledgement, the first subtle concession that he had registered the urgency of her warning. The energy between them tightened, a thread of understanding that stretched across the polished expanse of the dining area, connecting her alert focus with his strategic assessment. She remained composed, aware that each second carried weight, that the alignment of their attention and perception could alter the outcome of the unfolding scenario. Every reflection, every glint of sunlight across the crystal, every shadow cast by the elegant fixtures became part of the silent choreography, a network of cues that both guided and constrained action. Olivia inhaled slowly, feeling the cool air brush against her skin, the warmth of the ambient light balancing the internal tension, her senses sharpened to notice even the slightest deviation in movement, every nuanced shift in posture, and the silent dialogue that passed between her and Dante as the room continued in quiet normalcy, unaware of the precise vigilance that now defined the moment. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as Olivia Carter maintained her careful, measured stance, each movement deliberate yet infused with quiet urgency. The afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, brushing across the polished tables and illuminating the subtle shimmer of crystal glasses, but it did nothing to soften the tension that coiled like a spring in the air. Dante Romano remained seated at the center table, his posture impeccable, dark eyes fixed on Olivia with a gaze that seemed to dissect every motion, every flicker of expression. Calculating and absorbing each detail with precise focus. Olivia's mind traced the patterns she had memorized from previous shifts, the way the staff moved, the subtle variations in sound and reflection, the gentle hum of conversation, all layered into a sensory map that allowed her to predict the flow of activity around them. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of her tray, balancing the fine china and glassware with a practiced steadiness, each slight adjustment a conscious act to convey calm while remaining fully alert. She could feel the low vibration of the floor beneath her, the faint movement of air conditioning against her skin, the soft rustle of napkins, all feeding into her acute awareness of the environment. Dante's hand shifted imperceptibly on the table, a subtle acknowledgement of her presence and the import of her silent warning, the first hint of recognition that the urgency of her observation had been understood. Olivia's chest rose and fell in a controlled rhythm, her mind mapping out the proximity of every diner, every server, every potential variable that could influence the unfolding situation. The scent of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables mingled with the faint citrus notes from the table arrangements, creating a grounding layer that countered the adrenaline tightening her muscles. Her eyes caught the movement of a waiter in the corner, the slight hesitation in his step, and she adjusted her posture, shifting just enough to remain within Dante's line of sight while preserving the poised exterior necessary to avoid alarming the surrounding guests. The interplay of light and shadow highlighted the careful choreography required to maintain balance, each reflection and glint of glass amplifying the significance of her positioning. Dante's attention, sharp and unwavering, followed each micro-movement, the subtle widening of his eyes and tilt of his head a confirmation that the silent exchange between them had successfully conveyed the critical information. Olivia's mind remained a whirl of calculation and anticipation, aware that each heartbeat counted, that the alignment of focus and perception between them could determine the immediate course of events. She allowed herself a fraction of a second to sense the rhythm of the restaurant, the quiet cadence of the background activity, and how it contrasted with the intense alertness she maintained, blending invisibility with precision. Every detail, from the polished wood of the floor to the golden shimmer of the chandelier reflections, contributed to the orchestration of awareness she relied upon, creating a web of subtle cues and silent communication that spanned the space between her and Dante. The moment stretched, taut and heavy, charged with potential, as Olivia held her stance, poised to respond with measured accuracy, her senses fully engaged, and the understanding between her and Dante solidified in the quiet, unspoken language of presence, vigilance, and instinct. Olivia Carter felt a subtle shift in the energy of the room as Dante Romano rose from his seat, his movements deliberate, controlled, and precise, every step measured to convey authority while remaining responsive to the unseen dynamics unfolding around them. The golden afternoon light spilled across the polished floors, reflecting off the crystal glasses and silverware, casting elongated patterns that seemed to map the space with light and shadow, highlighting every subtle nuance in the room. Olivia kept her tray steady, balancing the weight with the practiced ease of someone who had honed such precision through countless hours of service, her dark eyes constantly scanning the periphery for any movement, any detail that could signal a change in circumstance. Dante's gaze, sharp and unwavering, followed her subtly, noting each shift in posture, the minute adjustment of her hands, the controlled exhalation that punctuated her measured steps. The patrons continued their hushed conversations, oblivious to the tension that coiled like a spring between Olivia and Dante, the quiet symphony of ambient noise providing both cover and contrast to the heightened awareness that defined every microsecond of their interaction. Olivia felt the familiar hum of alertness coursing through her, the rhythm of her heartbeat syncing with the subtle cues of Dante's presence, each beat a metronome for the meticulous orchestration of awareness she maintained. She adjusted the angle of her body slightly, ensuring that the tray remained perfectly balanced while subtly aligning herself within Dante's line of sight, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken communication that passed between them. The faint scent of roasted vegetables mingled with the woody notes of his cologne, a sensory detail that grounded her even as the pressure of the situation heightened her senses. She observed the soft flicker of a shadow across the far wall, noting the slight pause in Dante's stance, the minuscule tilt of his head, the subtle widening of his eyes, all indicating that he had perceived the significance of her warning. Olivia's chest rose and fell in a controlled rhythm, her focus sharpened to include every reflective surface, every glint of glass, the soft creak of floorboards under the subtle weight of movement, integrating all stimuli into a coherent map of the environment. Each detail informed her next action, every step, every measured breath, and each calculated shift in stance a testament to her readiness and precision. Dante moved deliberately toward the edge of the table, the light catching the fine lines of his tailored suit, his dark eyes fixed intently on Olivia, signaling that the information she conveyed through posture and gaze had been fully registered. Olivia felt a surge of awareness, the unspoken connection between her and Dante crystallizing into a synchronized vigilance, the room itself fading into a peripheral haze as their focus locked on the precise alignment of attention and observation required to navigate the moment. The tension coiled, potent and palpable, each breath, each shift of weight, and each subtle gesture adding layers of meaning to the silent dialogue that passed between them. Olivia remained poised, fully aware that every microsecond carried significance, that the synchronization of her vigilance with Dante's perception could shape the unfolding reality, and in that suspended interval, the shared understanding between observer and observed became the fulcrum upon which the next series of events would pivot. The tension in the restaurant had reached a delicate equilibrium, each moment stretching longer than the last as Olivia Carter held her position, maintaining perfect composure while every fiber of her being remained alert to the subtle shifts in the environment. The soft clatter of cutlery and the gentle murmur of conversation faded into a muted backdrop, allowing her to focus entirely on the intricate choreography of attention between herself and Dante Romano. The polished floors gleamed under the warm afternoon light, casting elongated reflections of the chandeliers above, each crystal catching the sun in a way that made the room appear both elegant and deceptively tranquil. Olivia adjusted her stance slightly, ensuring that the tray she carried remained perfectly balanced while her dark eyes scanned for the slightest irregularity, noting the way shadows played across the tables and how reflections might reveal the slightest movement near the entrance. Dante, standing now at the edge of his table, remained a study in controlled power, his posture impeccable and movements deliberate, exuding the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being observed yet always fully aware of every nuance in the room. Olivia could sense the subtle acknowledgement in his gaze, the faint narrowing of his eyes, the minute shift in the tilt of his head, signaling that he understood the import of her silent communication. The interplay of light and shadow created a dynamic map of the space, highlighting the polished wood, the gleaming glassware, and the finely laid table settings, each detail feeding into Olivia's heightened awareness, allowing her to anticipate the movements of those around them while remaining inconspicuous. She breathed slowly, deliberately, each inhalation grounding her and sharpening her focus, every exhalation measured to maintain the calm exterior that masked the intensity of her internal vigilance. The scent of roasted vegetables and freshly baked bread mingled with the subtle aroma of citrus from the centerpiece arrangements, a sensory detail that helped anchor her perception even as the stakes of the moment pressed upon her. Olivia's eyes flicked to Dante again, noting The slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers flexed lightly against the surface of the table, and she understood that the silent communication had been received, that the unspoken understanding between them had solidified into coordinated attention. Each micro-movement of her body, the careful adjustment of her weight, and the positioning of her hands on the tray were all part of a precise rhythm, a choreography designed to maintain balance, awareness, and readiness. The ambient sounds of the restaurant, the soft hum of conversation, the faint scrape of chairs, the clink of glasses, seemed to emphasize the stillness of the space around them, a contrast that heightened the acuity of every observation. Olivia felt the subtle vibration of energy in the room, the invisible threads connecting each detail into a cohesive awareness, and she remained poised, every sense alert to the next shift, the next cue, the next silent signal that could guide Dante's response and secure their careful balance. The room seemed to contract around them in that suspended moment, the interplay of presence, observation, and anticipation holding them both in a precise alignment where every decision, every gesture, and every subtle cue carried profound weight, and Olivia, fully aware of the delicate equilibrium she maintained, remained the linchpin of vigilance, composure, and readiness in the quietly charged atmosphere. The air in the restaurant felt impossibly still, charged with a tension that seemed to bend the space between the tables and the chandeliers, as Olivia Carter maintained her unwavering focus, every movement precise, deliberate, and weighted with intent. The sunlight filtered through the tall windows, brushing against the polished oak floors and reflecting off the crystal glasses, scattering subtle prisms of light that danced across the elegant table settings, illuminating the room in a warm, deceptive calm. Olivia's dark eyes scanned the far corners, noting every subtle shadow, every micro-shift of the patrons and staff, integrating the minutest cues into a comprehensive awareness of the environment. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the tray, each adjustment careful, the porcelain balanced perfectly, a physical extension of her meticulous mental mapping of the room. Dante Romano stood slightly forward now, his presence commanding yet restrained, the impeccable tailoring of his dark suit accentuating broad shoulders that seemed to carry both power and measured restraint, and his gaze followed Olivia with an intensity that communicated both recognition and calculated assessment. She felt the silent acknowledgement in the faint tilt of his head, the narrowing of his eyes, subtle gestures that conveyed understanding without a single word, and it steadied the rapid rhythm of her heartbeat, allowing her to maintain poise while the full weight of awareness anchored her senses. The low hum of conversations, the delicate clink of cutlery, and the soft scrape of chairs formed a muted backdrop that heightened the contrast between the normalcy of the environment and the undercurrent of alertness coiled around them, emphasizing the delicate balance Olivia held between blending in and maintaining vigilance. The faint scent of roasted vegetables mixed with a soft note of citrus from the centerpieces, a sensory anchor that kept her grounded as she adjusted her stance to remain in Dante's line of sight while monitoring every movement at the periphery. Her mind traced every possibility, recalling past experiences and training, translating subtle visual cues into actionable awareness, mapping the invisible threads connecting every element of the space, every reflection, every shift of light, and every micro-expression. Dante's posture shifted imperceptibly as he processed the silent communication, the subtle flex of his fingers against the tabletop and the barely noticeable deepening of his gaze conveying that the import of Olivia's vigilance was registered fully, creating a shared comprehension of the immediacy and importance of the moment. Olivia's breath remained steady, deliberate, and measured, allowing her to extend her focus outward while retaining the composed exterior essential to avoid drawing undue attention from anyone else in the room. The interplay of light and shadow continued to reveal small, otherwise unnoticed details, the subtle shimmer on a wine glass, the precise alignment of silverware, the reflection of sunlight along the polished floor, all elements feeding into her map of the environment, heightening both her awareness and her readiness. In that suspended, taut moment, the room seemed to fade into a peripheral haze, leaving only Olivia and Dante connected through the unspoken dialogue of movement, gaze, and posture, each micro-action and response layering into a silent understanding, a careful orchestration of presence and anticipation, and in that precision, the balance of the space shifted subtly in their favor, the awareness between them anchoring the unfolding events with clarity, purpose, and measured control. The subtle tension that had woven through the restaurant gradually transformed into a shared understanding between Olivia Carter and Dante Romano, a quiet acknowledgement that their combined awareness had shifted the balance of the room without a single word being spoken. The warm afternoon light continued to pour through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished surfaces of the tables and the crystal glasses, casting patterns that danced across the elegant floor as if highlighting the invisible choreography of attention and presence that had been unfolding. Olivia's hands rested lightly on her tray, fingers still and steady, a physical anchor to the mental precision she maintained, her dark eyes following Dante's subtle movements and expressions, noting the softening of his gaze and the almost imperceptible nod that confirmed her silent guidance had been understood. The patrons remained immersed in their quiet conversations, unaware of the vigilance that had quietly protected them, their laughter and soft murmurs forming a gentle counterpoint to the intensity of the unspoken exchange. Olivia felt the residual awareness in the air, the almost imperceptible hum of energy that lingered after the coordinated attention between her and Dante, a delicate resonance that confirmed the success of the silent communication and the careful navigation of every visual and sensory cue. Dante shifted slightly, the subtle motion of his hand along the edge of the table a reinforcement of the acknowledgement that Olivia's vigilance had been effective, and he took a measured breath, the faint tightening of his shoulders relaxing as the moment resolved into a controlled calm. The golden light accentuated the texture of his suit and the smooth surfaces around them, the polished wood and gleaming glass reflecting a world that had been quietly observed, analyzed, and managed with precision. Olivia's mind traced the flow of the environment one last time, noting the gentle sway of the chairs, the soft rustle of menus, the glint of cutlery catching the sunlight, all details woven into the careful map of awareness she had maintained. She allowed herself a moment to feel the rhythm of her heartbeat returning to a steadier pace, the controlled breathing easing, yet her focus remained acute, each sense alert to the environment that had now subtly shifted under their combined vigilance. Dante's presence, once imposing in its silent authority, now carried a tempered assurance, a recognition that the unspoken partnership had navigated the situation successfully, and he gave the faintest nod of approval, a gesture small in movement but monumental in significance, acknowledging the skill, courage, and precision that Olivia had demonstrated. The reflections on the polished floor and tables seemed to shimmer with the subtle satisfaction of a moment well managed, the gentle sunlight illuminating both the space and the quiet triumph of their silent coordination. Olivia held her posture, calm and composed, as Dante's gaze swept the room with measured assurance, confirming that the balance had been restored and the subtle dynamics controlled without drawing any undue attention. The room exhaled almost imperceptibly, the ambient sounds of soft conversation, distant footsteps, and the gentle clink of glassware resuming their rhythm, blending seamlessly with the aura of quiet triumph and the satisfaction that comes from awareness, precision, and courage executed flawlessly. In that suspended moment, Olivia felt the weight of accomplishment and the clarity of shared vigilance, and the subtle acknowledgement from Dante conveyed a profound understanding that the careful attention, courage, and presence she maintained had not only protected the environment but also established a silent bond of trust and recognition that would endure beyond the transient tension of the afternoon.